Please, don't hurt us, my daddy said to run. The dog is barking, snow is swallowing the alley, and the most feared man in the city is staring down at a little girl sleeping on trash in his territory, clutching a key men are already killing for. He doesn't know yet that by sunrise, that key will start a war he can't walk away from. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe, so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. Snow came down in silence that night. Not the gentle kind that softened city edges, the kind that buried them. It packed hard against alley mouths and swallowed the hum of distant traffic until the only sound left was wind pushing through the gaps between old brick walls. Alfred Christea walked alone. He always walked this stretch alone. Not from carelessness, from discipline. The industrial district at this hour belonged to shadows and stray dogs and men who had done things they preferred the dark to cover. Alfred was familiar with all three. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, unhurried in his stride. His black suit was fitted precisely, no tie, collar open at the throat where the edge of a tattoo was just visible. More ink marked the backs of his hands, symbols that were meaningless to strangers. A full biography to those who knew. His jaw was set. His eyes moved the way a man's eyes moved when he had survived long enough to read a street before he stepped onto it. He ruled this city's underworld, not with noise, with permanence. Men twice his age stepped aside when Alfred passed, not because they had been told to, because they understood, the way animals understood weather, that certain forces were simply beyond negotiation. Tonight, he was returning from a meeting that had ended exactly as he intended. Everything was in order. The city was quiet. He almost walked past her. The cardboard had blended with the alley floor. The mustard sweater was dulled under the yellow buzz of the street lamp overhead. If the dog hadn't growled, Alfred would have kept walking, but the dog did growl. Low at first, protective. The growl of something that knew it was outmatched but had decided not to care. Then a sharp bark, fierce and ragged, cutting through the snow silence like a warning signal from an animal too cold and too loyal to stay quiet. Alfred stopped. He turned, and he saw her, a little girl, curled on flattened cardboard between two dumpsters, knees pulled to her chest, a worn mustard sweater doing almost nothing against the cold, torn leggings, small boots worn through at one sole. Her dark hair fell across her face. One hand was buried deep in the brown dog's fur, gripping, even in sleep, like she had decided that was the one thing she was not letting go. The dog stood over her, thin-ribbed, shaking, eyes fixed on Alfred with an intensity that made the animal look far larger than it was. Alfred did not move. He simply looked. A child, alone, on trash, in his territory, in the middle of winter. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a runaway who had wandered into the wrong alley. Something had pushed this girl here, something with force behind it. He stepped closer. The dog barked again, louder this time, planting its paws, refusing to retreat an inch. The girl woke. Her eyes opened slowly, dark, exhausted, and immediately, horribly afraid. She found his face in the lamplight, tall, unsmiling, tattooed, dressed like a man who decided things, and she did something Alfred did not expect from a child in her position. She didn't scream. She pulled the dog to her chest and whispered in a trembling French accent, low and urgent, "Bruno, calme-toi, c'est correct." The dog whined but settled slightly, never taking its eyes from Alfred. Then the girl looked up. Her chin was trembling. Her lips were pale from cold, but her eyes, when they finally held his, were steadier than they had any right to be. The eyes of a child who had already used up her fear on something worse than him. "Please," she whispered. "Don't hurt us," my daddy said to run. Alfred said nothing for a long moment. He looked at her hands. The way she clutched the dog. The way her arms were shaking, not just from cold, but from the deep body exhaustion of someone who had been running and hiding and holding herself together for longer than a child should ever have to. And then he saw it, pressed against her chest, half hidden inside the sweater, something small and hard that she was gripping even tighter than the dog, even in terror, even half awake in a frozen alley in the middle of the night. A key. Alfred crouched slowly, the way a man crouches when he's trying not to frighten something already at its limit. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was low, level, the same tone he used to end arguments before they started. She stared at him, searching his face with the particular precision of a child who has recently learned that adults lie. Then, After a long moment, she spoke. Broken sentences, words that arrived in fragments, the way traumatized things always arrived. My parents, bad men came. She swallowed. There was noise, fire. Daddy put something in my hand. Her fingers pressed tighter against the key beneath her sweater. He said run. He said find someone strong, someone feared. Her eyes dropped briefly to the tattoos on his hands when she said that last word. Alfred's jaw tightened. He stood. The dog growled again as Alfred reached toward Clara, then stopped as the girl touched its head with a weak, deliberate hand. He stays, she whispered. Not a request. Alfred looked at the dog, thin, half frozen, still planting itself between a stranger and the girl it had chosen. He nodded once. He stays. He lifted her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been. Bruno rose immediately and pressed close to Alfred's leg. Still watching him, still uncertain, but following. Alfred carried them both to his car at the mouth of the alley. Snow continued to fall. The street lamp buzzed behind him. The alley returned to silence as though nothing had happened there. As though a child had not been sleeping on cardboard between dumpsters in the worst part of a city that Alfred Christea supposedly controlled. He sat in the back seat with the girl against his arm, and the dog pressed across both their feet. His driver said nothing. Alfred said nothing. But something had already shifted. He didn't know yet what the key unlocked. He didn't know yet who was hunting her. He only knew one thing with complete certainty, the way a man of instinct always knows before the facts arrive. Whatever had brought this girl to that alley tonight, it wasn't finished. And neither was he. The mansion did not know what to do with a child. Neither did the men inside it. Alfred's car rolled through the iron gates at 2:14 inches the morning. By the time it stopped under the covered entrance, 3 of his lieutenants were already outside, coats pulled on in haste, faces tight with the particular alertness of men trained to prepare for the worst. They were prepared for many things. Not this. Rowan, Alfred's most senior man, broad-necked, gray at the temples, 20 years in Alfred's service, stepped forward as the car door opened. He took one look at the girl draped against Alfred's chest, the brown dog jumping out ahead of them both, and said absolutely nothing, which, from Rowan, meant everything. The others exchanged glances. Alfred didn't acknowledge any of it. Heat, food, something small for the dog. He walked past them without stopping. Inside, the mansion was the kind of warm that only old money or new power could buy. High ceilings, dark wood, everything chosen for intimidation dressed as taste. There were no photographs on the walls. No softness anywhere. This was not a home. It was a headquarters that had learned to keep still. Clara barely stirred as Alfred carried her to the sitting room off the main hall. He set her on the long sofa near the fireplace, the only room in the building that held any warmth worth the word, and pulled a blanket from the armrest across her without thinking about it. Bruno jumped up immediately, circling once before pressing himself against her legs. His eyes found Alfred across the room, still watching, still deciding. Alfred led him. He stood at the edge of the room and looked at her in the firelight. She was small in a way that the alley had hidden. Out there, in the cold and the dark, she had seemed compressed by urgency, a survival shape, tight and braced. In here, under the blanket, face slack with exhaustion, she was just a child, 7, maybe 8, no older. The mustard sweater had a burn mark near the collar he hadn't noticed before. His jaw tightened. Rowan appeared in the doorway. Alfred, his tone said, we need to talk. His eyes said, now. Alfred stepped into the hall and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Who is she? Rowan asked, low. I don't know yet. Where did you find her? Alley off the industrial stretch. Cardboard and a dumpster. Rowan absorbed this in silence. Then, she's hurt? Cold. Exhausted. Not physically injured, not that I can see. Alfred paused. She has a key. Inside her sweater. She won't let go of it. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. The kind of shift that happened when an experienced man's instincts engaged before his thinking did. What kind of key? That's what I intend to find out. It was Rowan who turned on the television in the study an hour later. He didn't call Alfred in. He simply turned the volume up until it reached the hallway. He knew Alfred would come. He did. The news anchor was mid-sentence when Alfred stopped in the doorway. Identified as prominent businessman Raymond Fournier, found dead at the scene following what authorities are calling a targeted explosion at his private estate. The blast, which occurred late Tuesday evening, destroyed the property entirely. Investigators have confirmed the involvement of organized. Alfred's eyes moved to the photograph beside the anchor. A man in his 50s, sharp suit, confident posture, the look of someone accustomed to rooms where decisions were made. The name settled in Alfred's chest like a stone into water. He knew that name. Not well, not personally, but he knew the territory that name occupied. Fournier had operated in the gray space between legitimate wealth and underground finance. A man who shook hands with both worlds and trusted, apparently, that neither would eventually close around him. He had been wrong. Authorities have confirmed no survivors have been located at this time. The search continues. Alfred looked back toward the sitting room. My daddy said to run. He walked back down the hallway slowly. Clara was awake when he returned. She was sitting upright on the sofa, blanket pulled to her chin, Bruno's head in her lap. She was staring at the fireplace with the hollow stillness of a child who has exhausted the part of herself that cries. She looked up when Alfred entered. He sat in the chair across from her, not close, not looming, at a distance that said, "I am not going anywhere, but I am not going to crowd you either. What is your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara." He held her gaze. "Can you tell me what happened? Take your time." She looked back at the fire. When she spoke, the words came, slowly, carefully, as though she was handling something fragile and sharp at the same time. "We were at home. It was night. I heard men's voices not from inside." She paused. "Then inside. Daddy came to my room. He was moving fast. He didn't turn on the lights." Her fingers pressed into Bruno's fur. He put the key in my hand. He held my face. Her chin trembled once, then steadied. He said, "Find someone the city is afraid of." He said I would know when I found him. The fire cracked softly. Then he made me go out the back window. She swallowed. I heard the noise after. It was very loud. I didn't go back. Silence. Alfred watched her. The way she held herself. The way she breathed through the words, rather than breaking under them. She was holding herself together with the focused determination of a child who had made a private decision, somewhere between that window and that alley, that she was not going to fall apart. Not yet. Bruno lifted his head and licked her hand once. She looked down at him. And for just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, something in her face cracked open. Not into tears. Into exhaustion. The kind that lives deeper than tired. The kind that only comes when a person has been strong for far too long in far too short a time. Alfred looked away. He gave her that moment without witness. Then, quietly, he stood. He walked to the window. Outside, snow still fell across the city he controlled. Somewhere in it, men were already searching. He was certain of that now. And they would not stop because a child had found shelter. They would search harder. Clara fell asleep holding it. Even after Alfred had settled her back against the cushions. Even after Bruno had pressed himself warm against her side. Even after the fire had burned lower and the room had gone quiet. Her fingers stayed curled tight around the key, inside her sweater. Not loosely, the way a person grips something when they understand, even unconsciously, that it is the only thing between them and complete loss. Alfred stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked to the study and closed the door behind him. Rowan was waiting. He had pulled 2 chairs close to the desk without being asked. He knew Alfred well enough to know that whatever came next required sitting down not from weakness, but from the kind of deliberate stillness that serious thinking demanded. Alfred sat, steepled his hands, said nothing for a moment. "Fournier," he finally said. "I've been pulling what I can," Rowan replied. He slid a folded page across the desk. Printed notes, names, numbers. The kind of information Alfred's network could surface in under an hour when the right questions were asked. He was legitimate on paper. Import financing, private equity, 3 holding companies registered across 2 countries, clean enough to pass most scrutiny. But the holding companies had silent partners. Rowan paused. Eastern. Alfred's eyes lifted from the page. How Eastern? Rowan held his gaze. Far enough east that you've met them before. The room went still. Alfred set the page down slowly. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The particular stillness of a man who is not surprised, but is recalibrating. Measuring distance between what he knew and what he was now certain of. He had met them before. 4 years ago. A syndicate expanding westward with the quiet, patient aggression of something that had learned to move without being heard until it was already inside the walls. They had tested Alfred's territory with the kind of probing that powerful organizations used, not a direct challenge, but pressure. Strategic, deniable. He had ended it personally. One meeting, one conversation. The kind that left no room for misinterpretation. They had retreated. But men like that did not forget. They filed things away. They waited. They found new angles. They were Fournier's backers, Alfred said. It wasn't a question. Partners initially, then controllers. Rowan's voice was even. The working theory, and I want more confirmation, before I call it fact, is that Fournier held access to an offshore account. Significant funds, beyond significant. The kind of number that doesn't just buy influence, it buys restructuring. He refused to give it over. That would be consistent with the bomb. Rowan folded his hands on the desk. They don't negotiate when they're done negotiating. Alfred was quiet. Outside the study window, the snow had slowed to a drift. The city sat beneath it, still and white, looking from this distance like something peaceful, like something that had never once swallowed a man whole. The key, Alfred said. Yes, she's been carrying the access point this entire time, which means they don't have it. Rowan let that land before he continued. And if they know Fournier had a child, if they know she ran, they're already looking. Neither of them said the next part. They didn't need to. Both men had operated long enough in this world to understand exactly what happened to loose ends, what happened to small, unprotected things that stood between powerful people and what they wanted. Alfred stood. He moved to the window. The memory arrived the way memories did when he hadn't invited them without announcement, simply present. 4 years ago. A warehouse on the east waterfront. 3 men across a table from him, flanked by 6 more against the walls. Their leader had been a composed man, well-dressed, the kind of composed that came from being accustomed to getting what he wanted without having to raise his voice. He had explained, politely and at length, that expansion was natural, that it benefited everyone, that Alfred was a reasonable man who understood the direction things were moving. Alfred had let him finish. Then Alfred had said, simply and without theater, "If any of your people cross into my territory again, the next conversation won't happen at a table." The composed man had smiled, the kind of smile that meant, "We will remember this." They had left. They had not come back. But they had clearly never stopped moving. They had simply moved sideways, found a new door, found Fournier, and his financing, and his offshore account, and his access key. And now the key was in a child's sweater in Alfred's sitting room, and the men who wanted it had already burned a mansion to the ground to get it. Alfred turned from the window. "I want everything on their current operation. Locations, personnel, who they're using locally." His voice was measured, precise, quietly. "I don't want them knowing we're looking." Rowan nodded once. "And the girl?" Alfred was silent for a moment. "She stays here." "Alfred," Rowan stopped himself, reconsidered his words, tried again, carefully. "If it becomes known she's here, if they trace her here, then they'll know where to find me." Alfred's jaw set. "Good." Rowan looked at him for a long moment. 20 years of reading Alfred Christea, and he still, sometimes, found something in the man he hadn't expected. He nodded slowly, said nothing more. Alfred returned to the sitting room alone. The fire had burned to low orange. Clara was deeply asleep now, her breathing slow and even, one hand still pressed to her chest. Bruno lifted his head when Alfred entered, watched him cross the room, then set his chin back on Clara's legs. Alfred stood at the edge of the firelight. He looked at the key, or rather at the shape of it beneath the fabric. Small, ordinary-looking, probably. The kind of thing you could hold in one palm and think nothing of. The kind of thing that started wars. Somewhere across the city, phones were ringing in dark rooms. Names were being passed quietly between dangerous men. Somewhere, someone was already asking questions about a little girl in a mustard sweater who had walked out of a burning estate into a freezing night. Alfred crouched and carefully added a log to the fire. The flames caught slowly, then held. He straightened. He looked at Clara one last time. Find someone feared. Her father had told her. Alfred hadn't decided anything yet, but the decision was already making itself. The city woke up the next morning not knowing it was already hunting. That was the thing about the Underworld, it rarely announced itself. It moved through ordinary hours, through traffic and coffee shops and men in unremarkable cars parked on unremarkable streets, through phone calls that sounded like business and money that looked like nothing, through the particular silence of people who had been paid to watch and were now watching. Alfred knew this because he had built systems exactly like it, which is why, by 7 in the morning, he already knew they were searching. It was Rowan who brought the first report. He came into the study while Alfred was still at his desk. Alfred hadn't slept, though you would not have known it from looking at him, and set a single page down without preamble. 3 names, 2 locations, 1 number. The number was the reward being offered through underground channels for information on a surviving child connected to the Fournier estate. Alfred looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Rowan. How wide? Wide enough, Rowan said. Street level, bar owners, parking attendants, 2 officers in the 4th precinct who've been on the syndicate's payroll for years. He paused. They're not being subtle. They want her found quickly, because they know the key exists. Because they know they don't have it. Alfred set the page face down on the desk. He thought of Clara sleeping in the next wing, of Bruno pressed against her, of a little girl who had held herself together through the night with a composure that had no business existing in someone her age. Tighten the exterior, he said. Rotate the gate positions. I want nobody within 2 streets of this property without my people knowing about it. Rowan nodded and left. Alfred stayed at his desk. He did not reach for anything. He simply sat with the weight of what he now understood. It was no longer a question of whether they would find her. It was a question of when and whether Alfred would act before that clock ran out. Clara was awake by mid-morning. One of Alfred's staff, a quiet woman named Petra, who asked no questions, and had worked in the mansion long enough to understand that her job was competence, and silence had left clothes outside the sitting room door. A warm sweater, thick socks, something that fit. When Alfred passed the doorway, Clara was sitting cross-legged on the sofa in the new clothes, Bruno's head in her lap, staring at a glass of warm milk on the table in front of her as though she wasn't quite sure it was real. Alfred stopped. You should eat something, he said. She looked up. In the morning light, pale winter light that came through the tall windows without warmth, she looked younger than she had in the alley. More like what she actually was. A child who was very far from anything familiar. I'm not hungry, she said. You haven't eaten since before last night. She looked back at the milk. Then, slowly, she picked it up and held it in both hands. Not drinking, just holding the warmth of it. Alfred came in and sat in the chair across from her, not to interrogate, not to press, simply to be present in the room because he understood, in the wordless way, that some things were understood, that she needed the weight of another person nearby more than she needed to be spoken to. They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara said, quietly, Are you a bad man? Alfred was still. The question sat in the room between them. Direct. Unembarrassed. The kind of question only children asked, because they were the only ones who still believed the answer mattered enough to seek it plainly. He considered lying. He considered deflecting. He considered the dozen careful half-answers that a man in his position kept ready for exactly this kind of moment. He said none of them. I am a man who has done bad things, he said. That is not the same question. Clara thought about this seriously. She had the quality rare and slightly unnerving in someone her age of actually considering what was said to her before responding. Daddy did some bad things too, she said finally. But he was good to us. Alfred said nothing. He always said. She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked down at Bruno, then tried again. He always said that the most important thing was who you protected, not who you were afraid of. The fire crackled softly. Alfred looked at her for a long moment. At this small, exhausted girl in an oversized sweater, holding a glass of milk in both hands, telling him something her father had said, something she was clearly turning over and over inside herself, like a stone she was trying to understand the weight of. He sounds like he was wise, Alfred said. He was, Clara said simply. And then, because she was 8 years old, and had only so much capacity for holding the unbearable in place, is he coming back? The question arrived like something physical. Alfred held her gaze. He did not look away. He did not reach for comfortable words or gentle evasions. No, he said quietly. He is not. Clara nodded once. Her chin trembled for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stilled it with what Alfred was beginning to recognize as characteristic, this child's fierce, practiced, heartbreaking composure. She looked back at the fire. Bruno whined softly and pushed his nose into her hand. She let him. Later that afternoon, Alfred stood at the study window watching a dark car move too slowly past the far end of the street. It paused at the corner, sat for 30 seconds longer than any car had reason to, then moved on. Alfred's phone was already in his hand. Gray sedan. East corner. Follow it. Don't engage. He watched the corner long after the car had gone. They were closer than he had expected. They were testing edges, measuring the boundary between what they knew and what they could confirm. It was what careful, dangerous organizations did before they committed to action. It meant time was shortening. It meant quiet was no longer enough. Alfred turned from the window. If they wanted to hunt in his city, in his streets, while a child slept under his roof holding a dead man's key to her chest, then he would not wait for them to knock. He would find them first. Alfred did not make decisions loudly. That had always been his edge. Other men in his position led with force, first noise, demonstration, the theatrical exercise of power, designed to remind everyone in the room who held it. Alfred had watched those men rise and fall inside a decade. Power announced too often became a performance, and performances required audiences. Audiences had memories. Memories became vulnerabilities. Alfred preferred certainty over theater, which was why, when he finally moved, nobody saw it coming. It took his network 48 hours to locate the right thread. Not the syndicate's operation itself that was still buried under layers of proxies and borrowed identities, and the particular architecture of an organization that had learned to exist without a clear center, but a thread. One person at the edge of it who had been in this city long enough to leave impressions. A man named only in one intercepted exchange. A lieutenant, mid-level. The kind of position that knew enough to be useful and too little to be careful. Rowan brought the location at 11 at night. Alfred was already in his coat. They took him from a parking structure on the south side. Clean, quiet, the kind of operation that left no witnesses because there had been no spectacle to witness. 3 of Alfred's men, less than 4 minutes. The man, compact, 40s, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, found himself in a basement room he did not recognize, in a chair he could not leave, across a bare table from Alfred Christea, before he had fully processed that the evening had changed direction. Alfred sat across from him with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch the man. He simply placed a photograph on the table. Clara, taken that afternoon through the sitting room window, not by Alfred's people, but recovered from a device belonging to one of the corrupt officers Rowan had been tracking. Someone had already gotten close enough to photograph her. The lieutenant looked at it, then looked at Alfred. "I don't know what you want," he said. His accent was thick, Eastern European with something layered beneath it. "Yes, you do," Alfred said. Silence. Alfred leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. Enough to close the distance between a conversation and something else entirely. "I am going to explain something to you once," he said, "because I am not an unreasonable man, and I prefer not to waste either of our time." He folded his hands on the table. "The child in that photograph is under my protection. The key her father gave her is under my protection. And this city, every street, every building, every shadow your organization has been moving through for the past 3 days is under my protection." He held the man's gaze. "You are going to tell me where your base of operations is, and then this conversation ends." The lieutenant said nothing. Alfred waited. 30 seconds. A minute. He was in no hurry. He had made his calculation before he walked into the room. He understood exactly how long this would take. He understood exactly what the man across from him was weighing: loyalty against survival, consequences from his organization against the immediate, undeniable reality of where he was sitting and who was across from him. Alfred had sat across from men far more hardened than this one. He had always waited them out. It took 20 minutes. The address was a warehouse. Industrial district on the east waterfront. Different end from Alfred's territory. Deliberately chosen. Temporary base. The kind of setup designed to be abandoned quickly if things shifted. Which told Alfred 2 things. They were experienced, and they were not yet certain enough to commit to permanence. They were still in the phase of testing, probing, gathering, which meant there was still time, but not much. He returned to the mansion past midnight. The house was quiet. Petra had left a light on in the hallway. Alfred moved through it without turning on anything else, and stopped outside the sitting room door. He pushed it open slightly. Clara was asleep on the sofa, Bruno curled against her legs, both of them breathing in the particular deep rhythm of exhaustion finally surrendered to. Someone had folded a second blanket over her at some point in the evening. Her hand was pressed to her chest in sleep, still holding. On the coffee table beside her was a drawing. Alfred stepped closer. She had found paper somewhere. Likely Petra had provided it without being asked, and drawn in pencil what was clearly a house, large, detailed for a child's hand. A gate at the front, trees on either side, a dog in the garden that was unmistakably Bruno, and 2 figures standing in the doorway. One tall, one small, drawn with the simple, certain lines of a child recording something she loved, her home. Before, Alfred stood over it for a long moment. He was not a sentimental man. He had removed that from himself gradually and deliberately over the years, the way a surgeon removes something causing damage. Sentiment was not compatible with the decisions his life required. He had accepted that early and built accordingly. But standing in the low firelight, looking at a dead man's daughter's drawing of a life that no longer existed, something moved through him that he did not immediately have a name for. Not sentiment, something older and less manageable than that. He straightened. He walked back to his study. Rowan was waiting. Alfred sat. Placed the address on the desk between them. Rowan looked at it. Then at Alfred. When? Tomorrow night, Alfred said. I want it mapped by morning. Entry points, exits, how many inside, where they position their perimeter. He paused. I want our best men only. People who understand that this ends cleanly. Rowan picked up the address. And the objective? Alfred was quiet for a moment. He thought of the drawing, of Bruno in the garden, of two figures in a doorway that no longer stood, of a child who had not cried once since he found her, who had held herself upright through sheer force of something that deserved a better name than courage because courage implied choice and she'd had none. Dismantle it, Alfred said. Everything. Leadership, operation, communication lines. I want nothing left that can reach her. He looked at Rowan steadily. Nobody hunts a child in my city. Rowan nodded once. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city sat still and cold and waiting under a dark sky. And in the sitting room down the hall, Clara slept on, unaware that by the following night, the men hunting her would have far larger problems than a little girl and a key. Alfred had decided. And Alfred did not decide twice. The east waterfront smelled of rust and frozen salt water. It was the kind of district that existed in every city, the part that had once served a purpose and now served a different one. Old loading docks, corrugated walls streaked with weather and age, street lamps spaced too far apart to matter. The kind of place where sounds carried strangely and strangers were noticed immediately, which was precisely why men who needed to be unnoticed chose it. Alfred's cars arrived without headlights. 4 vehicles, 12 men. Black coats, no color, no sound beyond the soft compression of tires on wet ground. They positioned at the warehouse perimeter in the arrangement Alfred had mapped that morning, 2 entry points covered, 2 exits sealed before anyone inside knew the evening had changed. Alfred got out of the lead car alone. He straightened his coat, looked at the warehouse. A pale line of light leaked from beneath the main door. Shadows moved across it occasionally. Inside, they were still operating as though nothing was coming, as though the lieutenant they had lost 2 nights ago had simply gone quiet for reasons they hadn't yet decided to worry about. That miscalculation was theirs. Alfred nodded once to Rowan beside him. Then he walked to the door and opened it himself. The warehouse was larger inside than the exterior suggested. High ceiling lost in darkness above. Portable lighting rigs set at intervals. Folding tables covered in equipment, laptops, maps, communication devices, the infrastructure of an operation that had been designed to look temporary, but had been running for weeks. 11 men inside. Alfred's count matched Rowan's morning reconnaissance exactly. They all stopped when Alfred entered. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds, the amount of time it took for threat recognition to complete itself in a room full of men trained to recognize threats. Hands moved toward weapons. Postures shifted. Alfred raised neither his hands nor his voice. He simply stood in the doorway, alone, dressed in a black suit with no coat now despite the cold, and looked across the room with the absolute unhurried calm of a man who had already calculated every variable and found the result satisfactory. From the far end of the warehouse, a figure separated from the group and walked forward. He was tall, 60s, silver-haired and sharp-faced with the composed, deliberate bearing of a man who had built something dangerous from the ground up and knew its dimensions precisely. He wore his authority the way Alfred wore his, not loudly, just permanently. Alfred recognized him. He had sat across from him 4 years ago at a waterfront table and told him to retreat. He had retreated. He was here now, regardless. The man stopped 15 feet from Alfred and looked at him with something that was almost amusement. Almost. The thin kind that lived just above contempt. Alfred Christia, he said. His accent was precise, controlled. I wondered if it would come to this. It always was going to, Alfred replied. You're here for the girl. I'm here to finish a conversation we started 4 years ago. The man tilted his head slightly. You've complicated something straightforward over a child you found in an alley 2 days ago. That seems unlike you. She's family, Alfred said. The words arrived simply, without decoration, without the pause that a calculated statement received. They came out the way true things sometimes came out even before the person speaking them had fully confirmed their truth. The man studied him. That, he said slowly, is a lie. Alfred held his gaze. It's becoming less of one. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not doubt. Something more dangerous than doubt, the recalibration of someone who had built a plan around a specific version of his opponent and was now encountering a different one. You would risk your operation, your organization, your position in this city. He gestured slightly. For one child, I would, Alfred said. And I have. The man smiled then, thin and cold and absolutely certain of itself. You always were sentimental, Alfred. He said it the way you said something you intended to use. That is why men like you eventually lose. Men like me, Alfred said, tend to outlast the prediction. He looked at the man for one more moment, then he looked past him, to the far wall, the second door, the ventilation housing above the eastern corner. The man followed his gaze instinctively. That was the moment. It happened fast, not chaotically. Alfred's operations never descended into chaos because chaos was what happened when things hadn't been prepared. This had been prepared. Every exit sealed from outside. The ventilation housing where two of Alfred's men had been positioned since an hour before the cars arrived, triggered simultaneously. The secondary door came in from both sides at once. The room collapsed inward in under 40 seconds. Not with excessive force, with precision. With the kind of targeted, professional efficiency that left no ambiguity about who had planned it and how long they had spent doing so. Alfred did not move from where he stood. When it was done, when the room was controlled and the noise had settled back into the particular silence of a concluded thing, he looked for the silver-haired man. Gone. A rear panel in the eastern wall. Concealed, pre-planned. The exit of a man who had built his escape into the architecture before he ever needed it. Alfred stood at the open panel and looked into the dark passage beyond it. He did not pursue. Not because he couldn't. Because a man like that, running through a drainage passage in the east waterfront at midnight, had already lost everything that mattered. His operation, his personnel, his foothold in this city. Running was its own kind of message received. But he was still out there. And men like that did not accept conclusions gracefully. Alfred turned back to the warehouse. Rowan was at his shoulder. Clean? Clean, Rowan confirmed. But he's gone. I know. Alfred looked at the dismantled room. The folded tables. The equipment that would be removed before morning. The temporary base that would be empty rubble in the story of this organization's ambitions by sunrise. It's not finished. No, Rowan said. But it's different now. Alfred buttoned his coat against the waterfront cold. They came into my city quietly. They thought that was an advantage. He walked toward the door. Now they know it wasn't. Outside, the dark water of the waterfront sat motionless beneath a sky without stars. Somewhere in it, a silver-haired man was running. And somewhere across the city, a little girl in a mustard sweater was sleeping. Alfred got into the car. Both of those things mattered, but only one of them kept him moving. The silver-haired man had a name. It took Rowan's network until the following morning to surface it cleanly, not because the information was hidden, but because it was layered, built over deliberately, the way powerful men constructed themselves when they understood that anonymity was the most durable armor available. His name was Gregor Vasil, 63 years old. Romanian by origin, stateless by practice. He appeared in no criminal database under that name, not because he had never done anything to merit one, but because he had never done anything that could be proven to have been done by him specifically. He existed in the negative space of a dozen investigations. The name that came up adjacent to things, never inside them. He was not the syndicate. He was the person the syndicate answered to. Alfred read the file at his desk in the gray morning light and understood. With the particular clarity of a man who had spent decades learning to read power structures, that what he had dismantled at the warehouse was not the operation. It was the visible portion of it, the hand without the arm behind it. Rowan sat across from him. He's been running expansion into Western territories for 6 years, Rowan said. Slow, patient. He doesn't move until the infrastructure is already in place, contacts embedded, finances routed, local leverage established. He paused. Fournier wasn't his first entry point into this city. He was the third attempt. The previous two? Both failed quietly. Businesses closed. People relocated. Rowan's voice was measured. Nobody died. He learns from resistance. Adjusts. Until Fournier. Until Fournier refused to surrender the account access. Rowan folded his hands. At which point Vasil stopped adjusting and sent a message instead. Alfred looked at the photograph in the file. Facile at a distance taken through surveillance, grainy, unhelpful in its detail. Silver hair, straight posture, the composed face of a man who had made decisions that ended other people and felt the appropriate weight of nothing. "He knows Clara is here," Alfred said. It was not a question. It had stopped being a question somewhere around the moment the gray sedan had paused at the corner of his street 2 days ago. "He knows she's protected," Rowan said carefully. "He may not know exactly where. He'll find exactly where." Alfred closed the file. "It's what he does. He finds things. He waits. He builds the infrastructure of a conclusion before he announces it." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's something else." Alfred looked at him. Rowan did not look away, which meant what came next was the kind of thing that required the other person to be looking at you when it arrived. "We have a problem inside." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happened when a room recalibrated around a new weight. Alfred said nothing. He waited. "One of our communication lines was accessed 2 nights ago," Rowan said. "Before the warehouse. Someone inside our network pulled the girl's location and the status of our perimeter arrangements." He placed a single page on the desk. "I've narrowed it to 3 people who had access to that information at that time." Alfred looked at the page. 3 names. All of them men he had known for years. All of them men who had been present at the warehouse. All of them men he had built trust with across time and shared risk. He looked at the names for a long time. "When will you know which one?" "By tonight," Rowan said. "If you allow me to proceed quietly." "Quietly," Alfred confirmed. "Nothing moves until we know." Rowan nodded and left. Alfred remained at his desk. He had known, in the abstract theoretical way that a man in his position always knew, that betrayal was not a question of if. It was a question of when, and who, and how much damage had already been done by the time it surfaced. He had built his organization around reducing the opportunity for it, compartmentalized information, layered trust, kept the circle genuinely tight, and still, he looked at the 3 names. One of them had handed Clara's location to the man who had burned her home down. He found her in the garden. This surprised him. The garden was at the rear of the property and closed, private, invisible from the street, but he had not expected her to venture outside. He had not expected her to do most of what she did. He was finding. She was sitting on the stone steps that led down from the rear door, Bruno beside her, both of them looking at the snow that still covered the garden in unbroken white. She had a stick in her hand and had been drawing something in the snow at the edge of the step. When Alfred came through the door, she looked up, assessed him with those dark, steady eyes, and moved slightly to one side on the step, an offering of space. He sat beside her. He looked at what she had drawn in the snow. A house. Again, the same gate, the same trees, but this time there was no doorway with figures in it. This time she had drawn the house with its windows dark. He said nothing. After a while, Clara said, "Will they come here?" Alfred looked out at the white garden, at the high walls beyond it, at the gray winter sky above those. "I won't let them reach you," he said. She considered this. "That's not what I asked." He glanced at her sideways. She was looking at him with the direct, patient expression of a child who understood the difference between an answer and a reassurance, and was specifically requesting the former. "They will try," he said. "Yes." She nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something she had already decided. "Then you have to be ready," she said. "I am. Bruno is too," she added, with complete seriousness. "He doesn't look like much, but he's very brave." Alfred looked at the dog. Bruno looked back at him with the expression of an animal that had survived considerable hardship and retained its dignity throughout. "I can see that," Alfred said. Clara looked back at the snow. Then quietly, in the voice she used when she was saying something she had been carrying for a while, "My daddy said brave doesn't mean not scared. It means scared and still going." Alfred was still. "Not while I breathe," he said quietly. "Not while I breathe." He didn't know if he was answering her or answering something in himself. Perhaps both. Behind them, inside the mansion, his phone was already ringing. The curtain was lifting, and behind it, Gregor Vasile was not finished. He was repositioning, and this time he was aiming at the walls themselves. The call came at 4:47 inches the morning. Rowan's voice on the other end was controlled in the way it only got when the information was significant enough to require controlling. He didn't apologize for the hour. He never did. Alfred was already awake. He had not slept properly since the night he found Clara, and he had stopped pretending that was going to change. "We found her," Rowan said. Alfred sat up slowly. "Found who?" "Clara's mother." The words landed in the dark room like something physical. Alfred was on his feet before Rowan had finished the sentence, moving to the window. The city below, still and black and indifferent to the significance of what had just been said. She's alive? Alive. Injured significantly. She's been in a private clinic on the north side under a false name. Admitted the night of the explosion by a man we haven't identified yet. Someone who pulled her out before the building came down and got her admitted quietly. Rowan paused. She's been unconscious for most of it. She came around yesterday. The clinic contacted a number she had memorized. That number eventually reached us. Alfred said nothing for a moment. He thought of Clara in the snow-covered garden, with her stick drawing dark windows in a house she believed she would never return to. He thought of her particular, practiced composure, the 8-year-old's fierce refusal to collapse, and understood now that some part of it was not just character. Some part of it was the thing children did when they were holding grief at arm's length because they had not yet been given permission to put it down. Is she stable? For now. She needs proper care. The clinic is small, underfunded, operating on the edge of what it can manage. Rowan's voice tightened slightly. And Alfred Vasili's people will find her. If we found her, they will find her. It's a matter of time. How much time? Not enough to leave her there. Alfred was already moving toward the door. He went alone, or as close to alone as a man in his position ever went anywhere. 2 cars, 4 men, Rowan driving. They reached the clinic on the north side before dawn, in the gray pre-light that made the city look like a photograph of itself. The clinic was exactly as Rowan had described. A narrow building squeezed between a pharmacy and a shuttered dry goods store. The kind of place that existed on goodwill and inadequate funding, and the particular exhaustion of people who kept showing up anyway. The doctor on duty, a woman in her 50s with the eyes of someone who had seen too much and decided to keep going, met Alfred at the door and looked at him with the expression of a person rapidly revising several assumptions. "You're here for the woman in room 4, she said. "Yes. She needs more care than we can give her here." "I know," Alfred said. "She'll have it." The doctor studied him for a long moment. Whatever she found in his face, or decided to accept, was enough. She stood aside. Room 4 was small. White walls, thin light from a single window, the particular antiseptic quiet of a place doing its best. The woman in the bed was slight dark-haired, pale from blood loss, and weeks of unconsciousness. Her left arm in a cast, a healing laceration along her jaw, but her eyes, when they opened at the sound of Alfred entering, were immediately alert. Dark eyes. The same dark eyes as Clara. Alfred stopped at the foot of the bed. The woman looked at him, taking his measure, the tattoos, the build, the suit, the hour with a rapidity that told Alfred she was not someone who had ever had the luxury of slow assessment. "Who are you?" Her voice was rough from disuse. French accent, unmistakable. "My name is Alfred Christia," he said. "I found your daughter." The silence that followed was enormous. The woman's face did not crumble. It did something more controlled and more devastating than that. It held itself completely still, while something moved through it like a current through water. Her hand on the blanket pressed flat against the mattress. "She is alive," she said. Not a question, a thing she was saying aloud to make it real. "She is alive," Alfred confirmed. "She is safe. She is at my home." And Bruno? Despite everything, the white room, the pre-dawn hour, the weight of all that had happened, Alfred almost smiled. "Bruno is also alive and well," he said, "and apparently very brave." The woman closed her eyes. One tear only. She permitted herself one, and then she closed the door on it. "They will come for her," she said, eyes still closed. "They know the key exists. Raymond, my husband, he told me before he..." She stopped, opened her eyes, redirected. "They will not stop." "I know," Alfred said. "Then you know that hiding isn't enough." "I do," he said. "Which is why I'm not hiding." She looked at him steadily. "What are you doing?" "Ending it," he said simply. She held his gaze for a long time. The assessment of a woman who had survived something that should have killed her and had come back to alertness with her judgment completely intact. "Can you?" she asked. "Yes," Alfred said. She nodded once, slowly. The nod of a person who has decided to place the last of something precious into hands they are not entirely certain of, because those hands are the only ones available, and the alternative is unacceptable. "Then do it," she said, "and bring me my daughter." He brought Clara to the clinic that afternoon. He had told her, simply sitting across from her at the breakfast table, Bruno between them on the floor, Petra pretending to arrange things near the counter that there was someone she needed to see. He had not told her who. He had learned enough about Clara by now to understand that she processed information better in real time than in anticipation. Anticipation gave her too much space to brace. He wanted her to simply arrive. She walked into room 4 ahead of him. She stopped in the doorway. Her mother looked up from the bed. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that reunions in stories were dramatic. There was no running, no loud collision of relief. Clara walked to the bed the way a person walked towards something they had decided not to believe in, because believing and being wrong was too large a cost, slowly, carefully, as though the ground between the doorway and the bed might not hold. And then she reached the edge of the mattress, and her mother's hand came up and touched her face. And Clara Fournier, who had not cried once since Alfred found her in the alley, who had held herself together through the cold and the fear and the dark drawings in the snow, sat on the edge of her mother's bed and cried, not loudly, quietly, the way people cried when the thing they had been carrying was finally taken from them. Her mother held her with one good arm and closed her eyes and said soft things in French that Alfred could not hear clearly and did not try to. He stood in the doorway. Bruno pressed past his legs, moved to the side of the bed, and rested his chin on the mattress beside them both. Alfred looked at the three of them, the woman who had survived, the child who had run, the dog who had refused to leave. He had spent 20 years building an organization around the principle that softness was a liability, that the moment you protected something, you handed your opponent a lever, that the only durable position was the one that needed nothing and no one. He stood in the doorway of a small clinic room in the pre-evening light and understood, with the quiet completeness of something long approaching, finally arriving, that he had been precisely right and precisely wrong. He turned and walked back down the corridor. Rowan fell into step beside him. "The perimeter around this building," Alfred said. "Already in place." "Good." Alfred looked straight ahead as he walked. "Because Vasile is still out there. And now he's lost his warehouse, his personnel, and his timeline." He pushed through the clinic door into the cold air. "Cornered men do not become careful. They become reckless." Rowan nodded. "Which means he moves soon," Alfred said. "Tonight?" Alfred looked at the sky, gray and low, and pressing down on the city like a held breath. "Tonight," he said. He got into the car. The city waited around him, and somewhere in it, Gregor Vasile was already moving. The traitor's name was Doran. Rowan delivered this information to Alfred at 7 in the evening, with the economy of a man who understood that the facts themselves were sufficient and required no framing. Doran, 41 years old, 11 years in Alfred's service. Trusted with communication architecture, which was precisely why the access had been so clean, so invisible, so damaging. He had been passing information to Vasile's network for 4 months, not for ideology, not for grievance, for money, and for a threat against a family member that Alfred had not known existed because Doran had kept that part of his life carefully separate, which Alfred understood, and which changed nothing. Rowan had already handled it quietly, as instructed. Alfred sat with the information for exactly the time it took to absorb it fully. Then he set it aside the way a surgeon set aside something removed completely, without sentiment, because the operation was still ongoing. "Vasile knows our perimeter around the clinic," Alfred said. "Whatever Doran passed before we closed the line, yes. Then he's not going to the clinic." Rowan frowned slightly. "No, he's going to come at me directly." Alfred leaned back in his chair. "Think about what he's lost. The warehouse, his local operation, his timeline for the account access, his foothold in this city." He looked at Rowan. "A man like Vasile doesn't accept that quietly. He can't afford to. His entire authority within his organization rests on the perception that he delivers. If he walks away from this, if Alfred Christea dismantles his operation and protects the girl and nothing happens, he loses everything that keeps other people afraid of him. So he comes for you," Rowan said. "He comes for me," Alfred confirmed. "He makes an example. He demonstrates that there is no position in this city, no wall, no reputation that his reach cannot touch. He stood, which means we don't wait for him to choose the ground." Rowan looked at him steadily. "You know where he is? I know where he'll be." Vasile had one remaining contact in the city. A property on the Upper East Side, a construction site, 12 floors complete out of a planned 22, suspended mid-project by a financing dispute that Rowan's people had found in public records that afternoon. The building belonged, at 3 removes of ownership, to a holding company connected to Vasily's legitimate business architecture. He would go somewhere he controlled, somewhere elevated, somewhere that gave him sightlines and options. A man like Vasily did not make his last stand in a basement. Alfred arrived at the construction site at 10 at night with 6 men and no announcement. The building was dark from the outside. Inside, accessible through a service entrance on the north side that had been unlocked, Alfred noted. Recently, it was a skeleton of concrete and steel and temporary lighting that created deep wells of shadow between bright islands of visibility. They moved up through it floor by floor. On the 9th floor, they found the first of Vasily's remaining men. Then 2 more on the 11th. Alfred's people handled them efficiently and quietly, not because Alfred had instructed silence specifically, but because the men he kept closest understood that efficiency was its own instruction. He took the stairwell to the 12th floor alone. Vasily was at the far end of the open floor, standing at the edge where the exterior wall had not yet been built. A straight drop, 12 floors to the street below. The city spread out beyond it in cold light. He was looking out at it when Alfred stepped off the stairwell. He did not turn immediately. Either he had heard Alfred coming and was performing composure, or he had simply reached the point where surprise was no longer a resource he had. Alfred crossed the floor toward him. Concrete dust, steel rebar stacked against an interior wall, the wind coming in through the open edge with a cold that had teeth. Vasily turned when Alfred was 20 feet away. He looked diminished from the warehouse. Not physically, his posture was still straight, his bearing still deliberate, but something around him had contracted. The careful composure of a man who controlled things had been replaced by the harder, tighter composure of a man managing what remained. "You always were thorough," Vasily said. "You taught me to be," Alfred replied. "4 years ago. You showed me exactly how an organization like yours thinks, how it plans, how it moves." He stopped 10 feet away. "I've been thinking like you for 4 years. That's why you're here instead of gone." Vasily looked at him. Something shifted in his face, not fear, not quite. The recognition of a man who has encountered something he underestimated and is now performing the recalculation at a speed that is no longer adequate. "You would burn your position in this city," Vasily said slowly. "Your neutrality. Your arrangements with other organizations. All of it. For a child who is not yours. Empire means nothing," Alfred said, without lines. "Lines," Vasily repeated, as though tasting the word for its logic and finding it insufficient. "You draw a line around one child and call it principle. I draw a line around innocence," Alfred said. "Children. Families. People who are not in this world by choice." His voice remained level. "Fournier was in this world by choice. That is between him and whatever accounting exists for such things. His wife and daughter were not." He looked at Vasily steadily. "You crossed a line that does not move. And now you are here." Vasily was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat. Alfred was faster. He had always been faster. Not because of reaction time, though that was considerable. Because he had calculated this moment before he walked through the service entrance and had positioned accordingly. It ended quickly, professionally, without theater. Vasily sat against the interior wall, disarmed, 2 of Alfred's men at his shoulders, looking up at Alfred with the expression of a man completing a very long calculation and not enjoying the result. "This doesn't end with me," Vasily said. "The organization, your organization," Alfred said, "will receive a message tonight, from you, under your authentication, withdrawing all operations from this city and releasing all claims to the Fournier account." He crouched to Vasily's eye level. "You built your authority on the perception that you were untouchable. Tonight that perception ends. Your people will know it ended, and they will make the adjustments that people always make when the landscape changes." Vasily looked at him for a long moment. "And me?" "You leave this city," Alfred said. "Tonight, permanently, and every city you enter for the rest of your life, you carry the knowledge that I know where you are. That is not a threat." He stood. "It's a geography lesson." He walked back to the stairwell. Behind him, his men arranged the details. Below, the city continued its ordinary late-night life, traffic and light, and people who did not know and did not need to know what had just concluded 12 floors above them. Alfred came out through the service entrance into the cold air. Rowan was waiting. "Done?" Rowan asked. "Done," Alfred said. He looked up at the unfinished building. 12 floors of concrete and steel reaching toward a sky it hadn't yet achieved. "Get the message sent," he said. "Then get me back to the clinic." He got into the car. For the first time in 6 days, the city felt like his again. Not because the threat was gone, because he had drawn the line. and it had held. The paperwork for the new identities took 4 days. Alfred did not involve himself in the details, he had people for that. And they were thorough. New names, new documentation, a destination chosen for its distance, and its quiet, and its complete disconnection from anything that Vasil's network, in whatever diminished form it continued to exist, could follow. A house already arranged. A school already identified. The kind of careful, invisible relocation that left no thread to pull. He did all of it without being asked. He had not been asked to do any of it. On the last morning, Clara sat at the kitchen table with Bruno under her chair and ate breakfast with the particular focused attention of a child who had decided to be present for ordinary things, who had understood, somewhere in the previous week, that ordinary things were not ordinary at all and deserved her full regard. Petra moved quietly around the kitchen. Alfred sat across the table with coffee he wasn't drinking, reading nothing, watching Clara eat toast with the concentrated seriousness she brought to most activities. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, without looking up. "Somewhere safe," Alfred said. "Is it far?" "Far enough." She considered this. "Will there be snow?" "Probably not." She nodded slowly, as though adjusting an internal picture. "Bruno doesn't like snow anyway," she said. "He pretends he does, but his paws get too cold." Bruno, beneath the chair, made no comment on this characterization. Alfred looked at her. At the toast. At the completely ordinary scene of a child eating breakfast, as though the previous 10 days had not contained what they contained. As though she had not slept on cardboard in a freezing alley, had not run from an explosion, had not been hunted through a city by men who understood her only as an obstacle between themselves and something they wanted. She had folded all of it somewhere inside herself. Not buried it, he did not think Clara was the burying kind. She had simply placed it where it belonged and continued. He did not know many adults capable of that. Clara's mother was well enough to travel. The private medical team Alfred had installed at the clinic had done in 4 days what underfunding had prevented over several weeks. She walked slowly, her arm still in a cast, her face still carrying the evidence of what she had survived. But she walked, and the way she looked at her daughter when Clara entered a room with a completeness of relief that had nowhere to hide, was something Alfred made a habit of not looking at directly. Some things were not his to witness fully. He drove them to the private departure point himself, Rowan in the front, Alfred in the back, with Clara beside him, and Bruno between them on the seat, looking out the window with the dignified interest of an animal who had decided to approach new experiences with equanimity. Clara watched the city move past the window. Alfred watched her watch it. "Will you come and visit?" she asked, still looking out. "Perhaps," Alfred said. "That means no," she said. He didn't argue with her. She was right, and she knew it, and pretending otherwise would have been an insult to her intelligence that she did not deserve. "Then all right," she said, settled, decided. "All right," Alfred said. "You have to write back." "I will." She finally looked at him. The same dark eyes that had found him in the alley and decided in whatever rapid, instinctive calculus, a frightened 8-year-old applied to a tattooed man in a black suit standing over her in the snow to trust him. "Promise," she said. Alfred Christia had not made a promise in longer than he could accurately remember. Promises were liabilities. Promises were threads that could be pulled. He had structured his life around the deliberate avoidance of anything that obligated him to a specific future. "Promise," he said. Clara nodded, looked back out the window. Bruno rested his chin on Alfred's leg. Alfred looked down at the dog. The dog looked up at him with the absolute, uncomplicated trust of an animal that had made its assessment and was not revisiting it. Alfred put his hand on the dog's head. The departure was quiet. Clara's mother embraced Alfred briefly at the door of the departure lounge. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The embrace said what words would have made smaller. Clara stood in front of him. She was wearing a new coat, dark blue, proper against the cold, and her hair was clean, and she looked, Alfred thought, like what she was, a child at the beginning of something, rather than the end of it. She looked up at him. "You're not scary," she said softly. Alfred said nothing. "I thought you were," she continued. "In the alley, when Bruno barked, and you were just standing there in the dark." She tilted her head slightly. "But you're not scary. You're just strong." She considered this further. "There's a difference." Alfred looked at her for a long moment. "Your father told you that," he said. "About bravery, about scared and still going." "Yes," she said. "He was right," Alfred said. "You proved it." Clara held his gaze with those steady dark eyes. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Small arms, surprising grip, and pressed her face briefly against his coat. Alfred stood completely still for 1 second. Then he put one hand gently on the back of her head. 1 second, 2, 3. Then she stepped back, composed, decided. "Goodbye, Alfred," she said. "Goodbye, Clara," he said. She walked through the door to her mother. Bruno looked back once, one long, appraising look then followed. The door closed. Alfred stood in the car park alone. The city was behind him. Ahead of him was nothing but flat winter sky and the sound of a plane somewhere above the cloud line. He stayed there for a while. He did not examine what he was feeling with any particular precision. He simply stood with it, the way he had learned to stand with difficult things without fleeing them and without being consumed by them. Something had shifted. He had felt it building across 10 days, and now it had arrived and settled, and he understood it was permanent. He still ruled this city. That had not changed. His reputation had not softened. If anything, what he had done to Vasil's operation had calcified it further. Men moved aside when Alfred's name was spoken. That would continue. But he had drawn a line. Not around power, not around territory, not around the things that had always defined the boundary of his world. Around innocence, around children, around families who had not chosen this world and had stumbled into it through catastrophe or greed, or the specific cruelty of people who saw them as leverage. Anyone who crossed that line answered to him. He had not announced this. He did not need to. In his world, actions were announcements. What had happened to Vasil's operation would be understood clearly by everyone who needed to understand it. Alfred got into the car. Rowan looked at him in the mirror but said nothing. Alfred looked out the window as the car moved back into the city. His city. Streets he had walked for 20 years. Gray and cold and ordinary on their surface. Everything that mattered buried in the infrastructure beneath. He thought of Clara drawing a house in snow. Windows dark. He thought of her mother's one tear, permitted, and then closed. He thought of a brown dog planting itself between a stranger and the thing it had chosen to protect. Too cold and too tired, and too outmatched to win, refusing entirely to retreat. He thought of a dead man who had looked at his daughter in the dark and said, "Find someone feared." Raymond Fournier had known what he was doing, Alfred thought. He had known exactly what he was doing. The city moved past the window. Alfred watched it, not as a man surveying what he owned, as a man deciding what it was for. Thanks for sticking with this story until the very end. You're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.
Мораль. Когда ты заходишь в интернет и видишь, как люди там в Дубае летают, покупают себе огромное количество автомобилей какие-то. Ну, много всего такого, что ты за эту зарплату себе никогда в жизни позволить не сможешь. И как человеку оставаться морально типа сильным? Что ему нужно делать? Ну, наверное, во-первых, это, наверное, все от семьи исходит, да? То есть, какая семья у тебя, как она построена. Если ты один живешь, это сложно, да, ты будешь сам себя, но у тебя, опять-таки, возможно, ну, родители, если есть, которые, друзья, поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там, семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, ну, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. В чем, вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей, да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось, на данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все равно присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Новстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное, это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такое вот. И это борьба какая-то такая двух И вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Мелстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку